we are gathered to ascertain the truth.
In the shadowy halls of medieval castles and the dusty streets of ancient villages, love was no simple matter. Behind closed doors and in public squares, men and women lived under the constant scrutiny of watchful eyes, where a single misstep could destroy not just a marriage, but an entire family's honor. The medieval mind saw infidelity not merely as a betrayal between spouses, but as an offense against God himself. When suspicion fell upon a husband or wife, the accused faced trials that modern minds would find unthinkable. Imagine standing before your entire community, your fate hanging in the balance as you prepare to grasp a red-hot iron rod with your bare hands. The searing pain of burning flesh would be nothing compared to the shame of being branded This was the reality for countless medieval men and women whose loyalty came under question. In an age before forensic science, before psychology, before modern concepts of evidence, how did one prove something as intangible as The answer lies in, for brutal, bizarre, and utterly fascinating methods that reveal the medieval world's desperate search for truth in matters of the heart. These were not merely punishments, but elaborate rituals designed to invoke divine judgment. For, who but God could truly know the secrets of a person's heart? From trials by fire that scarred the flesh to public humiliations that scarred the soul. These tests of loyalty reflected a society where the line between religion, law, and superstition blurred into a single, unforgiving system. What you're about to discover may shock you, but it will also illuminate how our ancestors navigated the treacherous waters of love, betrayal, and redemption. The methods they devised tell us not just about their fears and beliefs, but about the universal human desire to know, beyond doubt, that we are loved truly and exclusively. So step back with me into a world where loyalty was tested not by words or promises, but by fire, combat, shame, and divine judgment. Number 1. Loyalty testing method. Ordeal by fire. In the year 1215, in a small village outside of Normandy, a woman named Eloise stood trembling before a crowd of onlookers. Her husband had accused her of betraying their marriage vows with a local merchant. The village priest held aloft a piece of iron that glowed orange-red in the morning light, having been heated in the church's fire since dawn. This was Judicium Dei, the judgment of God. And Eloise was about to undergo one of the most feared loyalty tests of the medieval world. The ordeal by fire? The concept was brutally simple. The accused would carry a red-hot iron for 9 paces. Their hand would then be bandaged and examined 3 days later. If the wound was healing cleanly, God had intervened to protect the innocent. If infection had set in, as it often did in an age before antiseptics, the accused was deemed guilty. God reveals the truth through fire. The priest intoned as he handed the scorching metal to The crowd fell silent, holding their collective breath. Medieval people believed that the physical world and spiritual realm were intimately connected. A person's moral purity or corruption would manifest physically during these ordeals. The innocent would be miraculously protected. The guilty would suffer the full consequences of their contact with the purifying element. Church records from across Europe document thousands of such trials, though historians debate how many actually took place versus how many were threatened to extract confessions. What's certain is that these ordeals were sanctioned by both church and state, appearing in legal codes from England to Hungary. The Leges Anrici Primi, laws compiled during Henry I's reign in England, specifically prescribed the hot iron ordeal for women accused of adultery. Men, interestingly, were more often subjected to trial by combat, revealing the gendered nature of justice in medieval society. The psychological impact of these trials cannot be overstated. Even before the physical ordeal began, many accused would confess rather than face what they believed was divine judgment. For those who did undergo the trial, the trauma extended far beyond physical pain. A woman like Eloise faced a terrible choice: endure excruciating pain or be branded an adulteress, possibly facing execution or exile. What's particularly fascinating is that some accused did survive these ordeals with their reputations intact. Historical records show cases where individuals passed the trial and were declared innocent. Modern scholars suggest several possibilities. Sympathetic priests might have ensured the iron wasn't fully heated, or applied secret ointments to prevent infection. Some communities may have used these rituals more as theater than actual determination of guilt. The practice began to decline in the 13th century when the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 prohibited clergy from participating in as the church withdrew its support. Secular authorities gradually developed alternative methods of determining guilt. Yet the ordeal by fire remains perhaps the most vivid example of how medieval society viewed the connection between physical suffering and spiritual truth. For a woman like Eloise, her burned flesh was not merely evidence in a marital dispute. It was the very language through which God spoke to the community. In a world without forensic science or reliable witnesses, the searing pain of hot iron became the ultimate arbiter of truth. The scars left behind would forever mark not just her hand, but her place in society. When we look back at these practices today, it's easy to dismiss them as cruel superstition. Yet they reveal something profound about medieval understanding of justice, truth, and the divine. In a society where God was believed to be actively involved in human affairs, these ordeals represented a desperate attempt to access absolute truth in a world of uncertainty. For the medieval mind, fire didn't just burn. It revealed. Method 2. Trial by combat. When blood proves fidelity, Sir Geoffrey of Lancaster paced nervously in the courtyard, his armor catching the morning light as he awaited his opponent. He was not fighting for his own honor today, but for that of Lord William, who suspected his wife of infidelity with a knight from a neighboring estate. This was trial by combat, perhaps the most dramatic method medieval society used to test marital loyalty. When accusations of infidelity involved nobility, especially when a husband suspected his wife of betrayal, the matter often ended in blood. Unlike the trial by fire, which was typically reserved for women, trial by combat was predominantly a male affair, a reflection of medieval gender roles that viewed men as natural warriors and protectors of honor. The concept stemmed from a simple but profound belief. God would not allow the guilty to triumph in sacred combat. Let God's will be done, the court herald announced as the two knights took their positions. The assembled crowd, including the accused lady, pale-faced and rigid, watched in tense silence. Medieval legal codes across Europe, from the Saxon Spiegel in Germany to the customs of Norman England, recognized trial by combat as a legitimate method of resolving disputes where evidence was lacking. In cases of suspected adultery, the husband could challenge his wife's alleged lover directly, or hire a champion to fight on his behalf. The stakes could not have been higher. If the accuser won, it was taken as divine confirmation of the wife's guilt. She would then face severe punishment, often death, imprisonment in a convent, or at minimum, divorce and destitution. If the defender prevailed, the wife was declared innocent, and her accuser faced penalties for false accusation. Historical records from the 12th and 13th centuries document numerous such combats. One of the most famous cases occurred in 1386 in France, when Jean de Carouge accused Jacques Legris of raping his wife, Marguerite. When the case came before the Parliament of Paris, insufficient evidence led to a trial by combat, the last officially sanctioned judicial duel in France. The brutal fight ended with de Carouge killing Legris, thus proving his wife's testimony true in the eyes of medieval justice. What makes trial by combat particularly fascinating as a loyalty test is how it transferred the burden of proof from the accused woman to the men in her life. She became a passive spectator to her own fate, her truth determined by the strength and skill of others. The psychological impact on these women must have been profound, watching from the sidelines as their reputation, future, and possibly their life hung in the balance of a sword fight. For the men involved, these combats were not merely physical contests, but spiritual ones. Knights would prepare through prayer and confession, believing that moral purity would strengthen their arm in battle. Many would have special masses said before combat or carry religious relics into the fight. The duel itself followed strict protocols. Combatants fought within a designated area, often a circular or square field. Spectators, including judges and the accused, would watch from a safe distance. The fight continued until one man yielded or was killed or disabled. As medieval society evolved, so did attitudes toward trial by combat. By the 14th century, the practice began to decline as legal systems developed more sophisticated methods of gathering evidence. The Church, which had long been ambivalent about the practice, increasingly spoke against it. Yet the concept persisted in popular imagination and in some legal codes well into the Renaissance. What's particularly striking about trial by combat as a loyalty test is how it reveals medieval society's conflation of might with right. In a world where truth was often elusive, physical prowess became a proxy for moral standing. The strongest arm was believed to be guided by the hand of God, a belief that offered certainty in an uncertain world, even if that certainty was built on blood. Method 3. Public humiliation. Shame is the crucible of truth. The crowd gathered early in the town square of Exeter on that spring morning in 1342. Children climbed onto shoulders for a better view, while merchants temporarily abandoned their stalls to witness the spectacle. Today, Thomas and Eleanor Fletcher would be subjected to the Skimmington Ride, a ritual of public humiliation reserved for those whose marital conduct had scandalized the community. Eleanor had been caught in what the townspeople deemed an inappropriate relationship with the local miller, while her husband Thomas was ridiculed for failing to control his wife. Public humiliation rituals represented the community's collective enforcement of moral standards, a medieval version of social media shaming, but with far more immediate and physical consequences. Unlike trials by fire or combat, which were formal legal procedures, these public rituals operated in the realm of community justice and social control. "Let all who betray their vows be warned," shouted the town crier as the procession began. The accused couple was paraded through town, seated backward on a donkey, facing its tail. Neighbors banged pots and pans, creating a cacophony known as rough music that served to draw attention to the spectacle. These chivalry rituals, as they were often called, took different forms across medieval Europe. In England, the Skimmington Ride was common. In France, the chivalry might involve effigies of the accused carried through town. In Germanic regions, the Katzenmusik featured discordant serenades outside the home of the offending couple. What united these practices was their public nature and their focus on shame as both punishment and deterrent. Court records and church chronicles from the 13th to 16th centuries document these rituals across Europe. The Luttrell Psalter, an illuminated manuscript from 14th century England, even contains illustrations of such processions. What is particularly fascinating is how these rituals targeted not just the unfaithful spouse, but often the cuckolded husband as well. A man whose wife was unfaithful was considered to have failed in his duty to maintain proper order in his household. The psychological impact of these public humiliations was devastating and long. Medieval communities were tight-knit, with individuals' identities deeply tied to their social standing. To be publicly shamed was to lose not just face, but often livelihood and community support. Many victims of these rituals were forced to relocate to distant towns where their reputation had not preceded them. For women especially, the consequences could be a woman branded as unfaithful might never recover her social position. She could be barred from church activities, excluded from guild memberships, and her children might suffer discrimination by association. Some women subjected to these rituals even faced subsequent violence from husbands, who felt their own honor had been damaged. What distinguishes public humiliation from other loyalty tests is its communal nature. While trials by fire or combat were conducted by authorities, chivalry rituals were organized and executed by neighbors and townspeople. They represented the community's collective investment in maintaining social norms around marriage and sexuality. The rituals followed surprisingly standardized patterns, suggesting they were deeply embedded in cultural practice rather than spontaneous outbursts. Participants often wore masks or costumes, creating a carnival-like atmosphere that temporarily suspended normal social hierarchy. This allowed even lower-status individuals to participate in judging their social betters. If moral transgressions were suspected, as medieval society transitioned toward early modern forms of governance, these public rituals gradually came under the control of formal authorities. By the 16th century, many towns had ordinances regulating or prohibiting chivalry, reflecting both changing sensibilities and the increasing centralization of power. Yet the practice persisted in rural areas well into the 19th century, demonstrating the enduring power of community-enforced morality. What these public humiliation rituals reveal is how medieval loyalty was not merely a private matter between spouses, but a social contract involving the entire community. Fidelity was seen as essential to social order, and its breach warranted collective response. In a world before privacy was valued as it is today, the boundaries between personal and public were permeable, and one's most intimate failings could become the community's most public spectacle. Method for church trials. When God becomes the judge, the great hall of the ecclesiastical court in Canterbury fell silent as Lady Margaret Thorne was led before the bishop's tribunal in the autumn of 1298. Her husband, Sir William, had petitioned the church to investigate his suspicions of her infidelity, a matter deemed too serious for secular courts alone. This was a formal church trial, perhaps the most methodical and far-reaching of all medieval loyalty tests. Unlike the physical ordeals or community rituals, these proceedings sought to determine truth through testimony, evidence, and the application of canon law. "We seek God's truth in this matter," intoned the presiding bishop, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. The church's involvement in marital disputes was no mere intrusion into private affairs. In medieval Europe, marriage was a sacrament, and infidelity was not just a betrayal of spouse, but a sin against God himself. This dual nature, both social contract and sacred covenant, placed marital fidelity squarely within the church's jurisdiction. Church trials for suspected adultery followed a surprisingly sophisticated legal procedure. The Corpus Juris Canonici, compiled in the 12th century, established detailed protocols for such cases. First, formal charges would be brought, typically by the aggrieved spouse. Then witnesses would be summoned and questioned under oath, a serious matter when perjury was believed to endanger one's immortal soul. Physical evidence might be presented, such as letters between lovers or testimony from servants who had witnessed suspicious behavior. What distinguished church trials from other loyalty tests was their emphasis on testimony and evidence, rather than divine intervention or community consensus. The accused had the right to defend themselves, call character witnesses, and challenge the credibility of their accusers. This procedural approach represented a significant evolution in medieval concepts of justice. Historical records from ecclesiastical courts across Europe document thousands of such cases. The archives of the Diocese of York alone contain over 300 adultery cases from the 14th and 15th centuries. These records reveal fascinating details about medieval marriages and the standards to which spouses were held. For women accused of infidelity, church trials could be both perilous and paradoxically protective. On one hand, if found guilty, they faced severe penalties, public penance, confinement in a religious house, or even excommunication. On the other hand, the church's insistence on proper procedure and evidence offered some protection against baseless accusations that might otherwise have led to immediate punishment by an angry husband. Men were not exempt from these proceedings. Church records show numerous cases where wives accused husbands of adultery. While double standards certainly existed, canon law technically held both sexes to the same standard of fidelity. The psychological impact of church trials was profound. Unlike the quick if brutal resolution of an ordeal by fire or combat, ecclesiastical proceedings could drag on for months or even years. The accused lived under a cloud of suspicion, often separated from their spouse and children during the investigation. Their most intimate relationships became subject to public scrutiny and theological analysis. What is particularly fascinating about church trials is how they reveal the medieval understanding of marriage as both a private bond and a public institution. Testimony often focused not just on specific acts of infidelity, but on the overall quality of the marriage. Whether the couple attended Mass together, if they showed proper affection in public, how they managed their household, the church's approach to evidence in these trials evolved over time. Early medieval proceedings relied heavily on character witnesses and reputation. By the 13th century, courts were demanding more direct evidence of wrongdoing. This shift reflected broader changes in medieval jurisprudence, moving from judgment based on status and reputation toward more fact-based determinations. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance and Reformation, church trials for adultery became increasingly contested territory. Protestant reformers challenged the Catholic Church's jurisdiction over marriage, while secular authorities sought greater control over moral offenses. Yet the legacy of these ecclesiastical proceedings endured in Western legal systems, particularly in their emphasis on testimony, evidence, and due process. What church trials reveal about medieval concepts of loyalty is how deeply intertwined religious and social understandings of fidelity had become. In a society where the sacred and secular were not separate spheres, but aspects of a unified worldview, the ultimate judge of marital loyalty was not just the spouse or community, but God himself, with the church serving as his earthly tribunal. Conclusion: the medieval quest for certainty and love. As we look back across the centuries at these four methods of testing: loyalty, trial by fire, trial by combat, public humiliation, and church trials, what emerges is not merely a catalog of strange and often cruel practices, but a window into the medieval soul's deepest anxieties and aspirations. In a world without modern technology, without psychology, without DNA tests, medieval people created elaborate systems to answer a question that still haunts us today. Is the one I love truly faithful to me? What's striking is how these methods reflect the three pillars of medieval authority: community and church, each offering its own path to a truth that seemed otherwise unknowable. The trial by fire represented faith and direct divine intervention, a belief that God himself would protect the innocent from burning flesh. Trial by combat elevated this same principle to a public spectacle, where God's will was revealed through the strength of arms. Public humiliation rituals placed the power of judgment in the hands of the community, using shame as both punishment and deterrent. And church trials brought the full weight of religious authority and emerging legal principles to bear on questions of fidelity. These methods may seem barbaric to modern sensibilities, but they served a profound psychological purpose in their time. In a world filled with uncertainty, they offered the comfort of definitive answers. When a woman's hand healed cleanly after holding hot iron, when a champion prevailed in combat, when a community rendered its judgment, or when a church court issued its verdict, the agonizing question of loyalty seemed, at last, resolved. Yet what these medieval loyalty tests ultimately reveal is how little has changed in human nature. Despite the vast differences in our methods, the fear of betrayal, the desire for certainty and love, the need for social validation of our most intimate relationships, these remain as powerful today as they were in the torchlit halls of medieval Europe. We no longer subject suspected adulterers to hot iron or trial by combat, but we have created our own modern rituals of verification. From checking phone messages to monitoring social media accounts, from hiring private investigators to demanding prenuptial agreements, the forms have changed, but the underlying quest remains the same. How can we know, with certainty, that we are truly loved? Perhaps the most important lesson from these medieval practices is not how different we are from our ancestors, but how similar, behind the strange rituals and cruel tests, lies a universal human vulnerability. The knowledge that to love is to risk betrayal, and that no method, medieval or modern, can fully protect us from that risk. The medieval quest for certainty in matters of the heart continues in our own time, in our own ways. And like our ancestors, we are still learning that love, by its very nature, requires a leap of faith that no test can fully replace.